Oh, good day, everyone. We're live here, and I'm talking to you from Hobart. It's really great to connect. First, I pay respect to the traditional and original owners of this land, the Muwinina people, to pay respect to those that have passed before us, and to acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal people who are the custodians of this land. I would also like to acknowledge the support provided by Copyright Agency for better reading to promote my novel, The Signal Line, and they're the reason we're able to connect today. So thank you for coming along. I don't know if we have anyone who has joined us just yet, but if you have, you've probably can detect my South African accent. Hi, Rose. And yep, I was born and raised in South Africa, and I left after university for what I thought would be a couple of years travel, and 11 years later, after meeting my Australian wife, I now find myself living in Hobart, where I write. Actually, the Signal Line is my first novel. It was published on the 1st of May, so it's only recently out. But I've been writing for all that time. So it's thrilling to have a book finally out in the world, and especially wonderful to be able to connect with you all here today to talk about it. I can see that we've got some more people who have joined us. Hi, Suzanne. Good to see you. Hi, Natalie. Hi, Kylie. Thank you very much for joining us today. Anything's on the table. We'll obviously talk a little bit about my book. There are some fun things that I can share about with you, the process and how it came to be. But if there are any writers in the room who would like to ask questions about craft, just shoot them through. We're open to anything in today's conversation. Hi, Jane. Hi, Jessica. Thank you. And we've already starting to get a couple of questions coming through. Perhaps to set the table, I'll just do a little introduction about what the novel is about, The Signal Line. It really centers around the protagonist. Our protagonist's name is Gio Rosenberger. He's 30 years old. He's an aspiring violist. He's from Hobart, but he's currently living abroad in Italy, and he's on the audition circuit with a dream, with a goal of winning a place on a major European orchestra, and he needs money to sustain himself in search of this objective. And so he comes home with the express purpose to sell his family's house. Him and his brother have inherited their family home. Their parents have passed, and the conflict between the two brothers is that his older brother, Wes, does not want to sell the house. But what makes the situation strange is that almost immediately after arriving, he gets pulled into a scenario by his brother, who's a detective in the Tasmanian police, and currently in the psychiatric unit at Royal Hobart Hospital, there are these 30 elderly Italian people who are claiming that they have arrived in Hobart from Italy by train. They got on a train just outside of Rome in a little town called Orvieto, and they got off at the old Hobart rail yards. And there is obviously a question on their sanity and their claims, but it soon comes to light that it is quite possible that they are telling the truth, and that they have inadvertently boarded a ghost train which has deposited them in Hobart, and which is now making appearances on the old tramways that line Hobart. And so Gio becomes caught in this situation while he is trying to deal with this conflict between him and his brother. So that's the basic tenor of the novel, and it is a little bit weird and strange, but also conventional at the same time. So let's pop in to see. We've got some more people who have joined us. Thank you, Mary. We've got Stacey, and maybe shoot through where you're from as well, because I know that this is a community that connects from far and wide. It would be great to see where everyone is connecting in from. So let's see, what inspired you to write the book? Well, the very first element that came to me was the ghost train story. I was working on another novel at the time, and as is always the case, a bit of inspiration crosses your path. For me, it was an article about ghost trains in Europe, and there was just something about the way that it was presented that really captured my imagination. So I set aside that project for a couple of sessions, and I very quickly formulated an arc for a ghost train that was starting to make appearances on the train tracks around Hobart and Tasmania, many of which are decommissioned. So I captured that, and then I put it aside. I had no idea at all to whom the story belonged, and it wasn't important to me. I like to collect bits and pieces, alongside whatever project I'm working on. So, it might be a character, it might be a motivation, it might be an odd incident or an event. And then I tuck them away. And then when the time comes that I want to write or I have to choose a new story, I then try different things on. And at that time, and this is quite important to the theme of the novel, I think, at that time, I had finished a novel, a manuscript that had taken me 6.5 years to write, and it was roundly rejected. There was just simply no interest in it. And so for the first time in my life, this is after writing for like 19 years, for the first time in my life, I was actually questioning my dream. Is this a worthwhile way to devote my time, 15, 20 hours a week on top of a full-time job? And would it be okay if another 20 years passes and I'm still unpublished? And so I thought it would be good to sort of explore that question in the form of a story. And that's how I came up with my protagonist, Gio, who's an aspiring violist who clearly has the talent to justify having the dream, but perhaps he doesn't have the talent to realize it. And I thought I wanted to sort of explore that idea. And if I could match that to the ghost train story, that might be an interesting mix. And the reason why I thought the ghost train might be a good metaphor is that there's just nothing as solid and certain as a train on a track. What more knows its direction than that kind of vehicle? And I thought, the idea of a train pulling into a station before a platform of people who are waiting to board it and then vanishing before their eyes, there was something in that sort of reflected my own feeling of my goal of being a writer vanishing before my eyes. And so when I found those two things, I felt like I had a dynamic that would work, so that's really the genesis for the story. Have you always been interested in ghost stories? And that's a question from Rose. Thank you, Rose. No, I'm interested in ominous things lurking around the fringes, and then mixing that with something that's very conventional or very domestic. It had never occurred to me to write a ghost story or to write a ghost train story until I read that article and just thought, oh, there might be something there. And my day job sees me driving across Tasmania, such a beautiful state, but in the process, crossing over these train lines, most of which are out of commission. And so, that just sparks the imagination, but not ghost stories particularly, but definitely things of a surreal or an otherworldly nature. There's some element of surreal in everything that I write. Thank you, Mary. She said it sounds fascinating. I appreciate that. And Mary has said she's from Melbourne in Victoria. I've been living in Australia for 14 years now, and my first 2 years were in Melbourne before my wife and I relocated across to Hobart. Hello, Judy from the Gold Coast. Thanks for connecting in. And Linda Ann, lovely to hear a fellow South African. Thank you. I'm glad that you think my story sounds interesting. Linda Ann's checking in from Canberra. Oh, thanks, Suzanne. She's going to have to go. Thanks for popping in for a few minutes. I appreciate that. Oh, and Carol shared a book she's reading. I'm reading The German Wife. Excellent. I haven't heard of that. So I'll have to check that out. Brendan, sounds very interesting. I like the idea of ominous. Thanks, Melissa. And Warren has joined us. Thanks for joining us, Warren. Oh, someone I know. Good to have a friend who's asked if I can talk a little bit about our writing process. So I write routinely. I'm lucky where I'm able to do that, and I write every evening. And the reason why that's possible is because my wife is also a writer, so we're able to support each other with the time that we both need to sort of have that solitude you need to write. So I write every evening. So there's a routine there. But in terms of an actual process, the entry into every novel is different, and then I try to use sort of certain techniques to get into the story. I'll share a couple of those with you here, but essentially what the objective is for me, and it can take 1, 2, 3, 4 years to get to this point, but you want to write yourself into a position where it's not as if the story's telling you how it wants to be written, but it reaches a point where it's so organic that it becomes quite clear what doesn't belong and what does belong. And so a sort of a narrative direction almost becomes obvious, and you start seeing a path before you. But to get to that point feels like a fairly mechanical process. For me, I normally always come up with some sort of concept or premise, such as the ghost train, and not characters. And I know not most other writers, but for many writers, the thing that comes first is the character or the voice. For me, the thing that comes first is the idea. It gets me in a lot of trouble, because if I get too excited about an idea and I just start writing it and just start making up characters to serve that plot or that idea, the characters don't feel very human. It certainly feels like they're not driving the story. So my process is to then put it aside and to go in search of my characters, and I'm looking for competing motivations. I'm looking for conflict that can be very organic, that if you have 2 or 3 or 4 characters on the stage in a particular setting, that just by opening their mouths, there is a natural and an organic conflict to help there be a tension that can drive the story. So those are the sorts of things I'm searching for before I actually begin writing. And then once I start the writing itself, I'm looking to hit certain beacons, certain markers. And the most important marker for me is the midpoint event in my story. If you've read the signal line, it'll stand out very clearly what that event is. And that's the point in which my character goes from being reactive to proactive, where they start trying to take ownership of the situation they are in to bring it to a conclusion, whereas leading up to that point, they really might be pulled in many directions by it, and not that they don't understand what's happening to them, but they don't have any sort of control of it, or maybe even any interest in taking control of it. So I think I'll sort of pull back from the process there, because it's coming at it from a premise point of view, then from a character point of view, a motivation point of view, and then from a structure point of view, and just trying to find your way into the novel so that it can sort of reveal to you what the story wants to be. Thanks for that question, Warren, much appreciated, and I'm sure it'll be okay if I do a little plug here. Almost finished Warren's excellent book, The Lovers of Philosophy, which I recommend to everyone. It's a really interesting and worthy book. Melissa says that I'm lucky for living in Hobart. You know, it's interesting. Thank you, Melissa. I've been writing for 25 years, and everything that I had written since I left South Africa until I arrived in Hobart was set in a fictional place. I just felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And so when my imagination went to work, and I sort of lived in the environment of my stories, I felt more comfortable sitting in some nondescript place. And it was only after we settled down in Hobart, after a few years, that I felt like I belonged somewhere, and I felt like I had roots, and I felt connected to a place. And I actually then had the confidence to set a story, there. And for me, this is a very Hobart book, or at least that's what I've tried to do, is to write a book that feels it has universal themes. It feels like it is a story that speaks to many things, but it's a story that belongs on the stage that is Hobart. So it's my little tribute to the town that has become my home. Thanks, Judy. Isn't it a great cover? Thank you for saying that you enjoy it. Josh Durham from Design by Committee designed this cover, and I just think it captures for me, in any case, captures the essence and the energy of the story I've tried to tell. What inspired me to become an author? Thanks for the question, Colley. Honestly, I chose to become a writer, or I chose to spend time writing to replace another dream that I had growing up through my youth. I wanted to be a professional soccer player. And like my character, I played with a lot of players who went on to have professional careers, but I myself didn't have the talent. I could play with them through the youth level, but I wasn't ever good enough to go on. It was not a question of luck, it was a question of talent. And so it was useful because it paid for university. But when I finished university, I was going to stop. There was no way that I could play soccer socially. It was too important as a dream, something to aspire to. But there was going to be a vacuum of time in my life that needed filling. And the one thing that I learned is I so enjoyed having a dream, having something to wake up to every day, that I was going to make sacrifices for, that I was going to try to become better at every single time that I did it, that I was going to suffer for. I needed something else. And I chose writing because it was the only other thing that I was doing at the time. I was writing lyrics for a pianist. We sort of thought we might be the next Bernie Taupin and Elton John. And so I thought, well, hold on, let's see if I can write something different. And I remember that first summer, I wrote a book of short stories. And then I wrote a play. And then I wrote another play. And then I started writing a screenplay. This is in the space of about 5 or 6 months. And I was like, that's it. That's it. This is what I'm going to dedicate myself to. And the thing that I liked about it was that unlike soccer, which has a shelf life and you have to make it by a certain age, many disciplines, with writing, if I wasn't good enough, no one could ever take it away from me. I could just write forever. And thank goodness that I sort of recognized that as a reason for choosing writing, because it's taken, 26 years and 4 months, I counted, from the day I decided to choose writing until the day this book was released in the world. So it certainly has been a journey of love. Thank you. Is it true your wife owns a bookshop? No, that's not true. My wife is a bookseller. She works at the Hobart Bookshop. So yeah, that's where she works. And I give a shout out to Yvonne. Melissa, thank you. I visited Tasmania 3 times and I feel so connected to the place. It's my heart home. Oh, that's beautiful to hear. We were in Melbourne, as I mentioned a little bit beforehand, a little bit earlier, and but my parents-in-law, they had retired to Tasmania a number of years before, and it's exactly what you say, Melissa, where we would come across for Christmases or to visit, and you just can't help but fall in love with Tasmania, and we just love it here. What did you think when you saw the cover art from Jane? Thank you. Yes, I mentioned before that Josh Durham sent it through, and I don't think I had any specific ideas of what I wanted the cover to be, but this is absolutely true, is that through the editorial process, and I said this to my wife a couple of times, I'm like, it's yellow. Something's going to be done with yellow. I don't know why, I can just feel it. I thought it might be like a sun, or a that light on the front of a steam train. But I just got this feeling that yellow was going to come out. So when I saw this cover out, I'm like, it makes perfect sense. And I sort of feel like I was on the signal line with that. So thanks for asking, Jane. Judy, thanks. Can't wait to read the signal line. Thank you. I really appreciate how many people have logged in. I'm just scrolling back to see if I've missed anybody. Colley from Adelaide. Hi, Colley. And let's see if we have any other questions. Shoot them through. It's interesting. When I knew I was exploring the question of, I wanted to have a motivation where someone was really in hot pursuit of their dream, but was questioning whether or not this is something they could ever achieve. There's a couple of points that I could share about that, which may be interesting to you. The story was really activated when I found the character Sten Svensson, and he is a Swedish ghost train hunter, and he's been chasing this train for 40 years. So he is in pursuit of something himself, and he arrives in Hobart, and him and Gio, the aspiring violist, form this unlikely friendship. And Gio actually accompanies Sten as he stakes out his train on abandoned platforms and so forth. And there was something in that visual I really liked, of two people just waiting on an abandoned platform, and Gio maybe playing his viola. And but that's where the novel, for me, in writing it, really was given its life and its essence, because here was Sten, a 60-year-old man, who has been chasing this train for 40 years for a reason which I won't share now as a spoiler. And he is completely at peace in the pursuit of something that is unattainable. And yet here is Gio, 30 years old, his dream so close, so within reach, and yet is in a state of angst about not having what is seemingly right in front of him. And I thought that dynamic can help Gio to really question whether or not he's looking at things in the right way. And last year, the best writing advice I ever received was last year, and I wish I had received this writing advice at the beginning of my writing journey 25 years ago. But I was listening to a podcast by a British playwright was being interviewed, and she is kind of, she's been a professional creative or a writer for 25 years, 30 years. And she said right at the start, she studied theatre, and right at the beginning of her journey, her tutor or her mentor challenged her and the fellow students in her class with a question that they had to answer. And the question was, do you want a writing life, or do you want a writing career? And if you think about that, the answer to that question really sort of dictates two different paths you can take. And it became clear to me over the years that I wanted a writing life. This is how I was able to deal with the rejection of so many manuscripts being rejected, is that there was a reward in the act of being creative, that creating something can fundamentally change a person at their core. Yes, there is nothing more wonderful than someone reading your work and responding to it. But there is also value in the act of creating something. And it made me realize that I always had writing, just by doing it. That being published wasn't to then get it. That there are many things in our lives that we already have, but we're still searching for, because we're looking at it in a different way. And that was the realization that I wanted my protagonist. That's the point I wanted to get him to within the time framework of this novel. That was his inner journey that he was going on. Does your wife have anything out that we may have heard or read? She herself has had a similar journey to me. Thank you, Colley, for asking that question. She is unpublished now, and she is a good deal of a way through her current project, a novel. She writes young adult fantasy, and I can tell you it's excellent, and I've already read pages, and I'm extremely excited to see the finished version of the story. It's wonderful, and that would make the dream complete, is if she gets to experience a book out in the world too, like I have, and I'm confident that she will. And maybe to take one final question, because we are coming up to half past the hour, and we're going to be wrapping up shortly. What are you working on now? I'm about a year and a half on. Thank you, Jane, and Natalie also asked that question. I can't speak specifically to the story. I'm about a year and a half into a project which I finally have figured out where the story is going. What I can say is that it's set in Hobart, so it's the same stage, the same landscape. It is set in a home. It's a story about two parents. The parents are with us and their adult children, and they're estranged. But there is also something ominous lurking around the fringes, which is going to come and turn everything on its head. So if you enjoy the signal line, there is probably something in this new project, hopefully, that will resonate too. But I would like to thank everyone for coming in and sharing in this connection today. It has been my privilege and honor. I would again like to acknowledge the support provided by Copyright Agency for better reading to promote the signal line, and for giving us this opportunity to have this connection today. Thanks for your interest, everyone.